Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from whatever time zone you're joining us. So today it is my great pleasure to welcome our distinguished guest, Jorge de Carvalho. He's an anthropologist and professor at the Department of Anthropology at the University of Brasilia. Since 1999, he has been actively engaged in the debate on quotas at UNB. He worked on the pioneering proposal for quotas for Black and Indigenous people at the institution in 2003 and has been instrumental in projecting and enhancing the affirmative action movement in other Brazilian public higher education institutions. A tireless advocate and creator of anti-racism initiatives in the academic space, Jose continues to strive perspectives and models for the expansion and deepening of quotas in affirmative action. He is the creator of another model of inclusion known as the Meeting of Knowledges, which focuses on incorporating masters of traditional knowledge, particularly from indigenous and Afro-diasporic communities, as teachers and researchers. This movement, which began at UNB in 2010 through the Institute for Inclusion in Higher Education and Research, INCT, has since spread to other universities over the past decade. It develops from a perspective that articulates with ethnic racial quotas, known as the epistemic quotas. From this broad perspective, the Meeting of Knowledges, now present in 20 public higher education institutions in Brazil, has become a significant movement in the decolonization of academic spaces. It has had a particular impact on challenging the Eurocentric and white monoepistemic model that dominates the curricula and research. We are really honored to have him here with us today to share his valuable insights and experiences. This event especially marks the first talk in the distinguished lecture series. And in terms of the structure, our speaker will be speaking for 50 minutes, and it will be followed by Q&A session as well. So please join me in welcoming Jorge de Carvalho. With this, I pass it on to Suraj. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Rohit, for that extremely lucid segue to this exciting talk. I cannot tell you how excited I am to, of course, learn, but also present to you all Professor Carvalho. I got to know about his work first from my friend Achal, who was appointed as President Dilma's advisor. And during his sojourns in Brazil, he mentioned to me about a man who works on quota, and also he had noticed there were Ambedkar books around him. And this was about 4 or 5 years ago or more. And it just inspired me to think about, and in my mind, I don't know anything about Brazil, neither I know nothing about Latin America except reading in books. I imagine a professor sitting in some library doing the work, and I thought I would never be able to have an acquaintance with him. But I'm very fortunate that we started to regroup a lecture series. So the lecture series that we have is we have 5 in installments now, and one of the purpose of this lecture series and to institute a distinguished lecture series is to commend the life and work and scholarship of people who are alive. Oftentimes, we establish lecture series when people leave, when they die. And so it's very rare for us to notice their contributions when they're alive. So we wanted to shift that and celebrate people who are alive. And that's why Professor Sukhdeo Thorat, who was, of course, many of you know, was a chairperson of university's Grand Commission, the highest university decision-making body in university in India. And also he was somebody who was very instrumental in giving, making quotas and facilities for students from the Scheduled Caste, Scheduled Tribe, the Dalit, Adivasi, and given them grants while they are studying, and many students have benefited. So it was very befitting that somebody of his stature to complement the stature of Professor Jose de Carvalho, whose work, when I started to read, especially from the 1990s, and some of that is available in English, was very moving, especially with the way he deals with the questions, not least about representation and having the quotas, because quota is a very unique model that we see in India, and very rarely, if at all, we see in parts of the country where it is the rule book. Many times it is affirmative action, which has to do with the whims and policies of the current existing administration. So in this case, quota is something that is there, And Professor Carvalho himself was also trying to look at the masters of knowledge. In fact, there is also a possibility, I think there's a university somewhere in Brazil, which is some state university that grants PhD for people with the knowledges that they bring from the community. And it's subverting. And it made me think about the education models that we had in ancient Buddhist universities such as Nalanda and so forth, where writing an examination gives you a degree, but also a practice and achievement of a certain pedagogy, but also experience matters a lot. So, and in this case, it opens many other facets. And we, of course, know the Buddhist monastery, the vihara, then eventually became and inspired as it transferred to many parts of the world into madrasas. Madrasa as a concept was later taken up by the Islamic school, who then started to teach madrasas, and it became also a space of not only talking about religion, but talking about many other facts. And that's why we see many Islamic origin scientists and astronomers and mathematicians coming out of that tradition. And that then gets, as it goes through Iberia and onwards, even up until 6th, 7th century into Europe through the Islamic kind of caliphate, that then also becomes into formation of many seminaries. So we see the inspiration of such happens. And in this, if you had to write an exam and curriculum, one could only imagine as much as rigorous it is, it needs a new decolonial approach. Professor Carvalho is here to educate, and I'm very happy. He will speak for 15 minutes. He will tell us, and we also named it. And I also hope he will touch upon some of his own discoveries of Dr. Ambedkar, how he thought about this issue. And we have some plans that we hope to do down the line. When it is ripe, we will share with you. Now, over to you, Professor Carvalho.
Oh, thank you. Well, good morning for all of you, or good afternoon, I don't know. Well, it's something, for me, it's an incredible joy and incredible pleasure to I thank you, Suraj, wholeheartedly for the honor of this invitation. Yes, it's a long overdue conversation, and finally we meet and we can share, our experiences on these issues of quotas and epistemic quotas. I will speak very briefly, and I had to sum up the situation of Brazil, imagining how different it is from the situation of India, and so that we can later start to think of, of joint researches of how to really compare our two situations. And I start by saying that I'm the head of the Institute of Inclusion, which is called the whole name is Institute of Inclusion in Higher Education and Research. I start from the middle, just to say that the institute was opened in 2009, and reinstalled in 2010, after the struggle for quotas that started at the University of Brasilia, because we were the first federal university to open quotas. When the National Research Council decided to start with a great project of like 100 of like top research teams and institutes of research in the country, we participated in that, and we were happy enough to finally have the grant to open the institute, and the institute started in Brasilia. So it is like a great archive. It's like a memory and an observation of the system of quotas in the country, and after that, the meeting of knowledges. But before I enter into detail of quotas, I think I should say certain things about Brazil that perhaps, as you say, Suraj, and right, that perhaps in India people are not so familiar. Some basic facts about Brazil that I think are important to pinpoint. 300 years of slavery in all regions of the country. Remember, Brazil was the last country to abolish slavery only in 1888. So it started in around 1540s, 1550s, up to 1888. Slave trade was considered illegal in 1830, but it continued illegally until 1850s and a bit longer. So it's the entire revolution of the 19th century. There was no connection. Brazil was a very closed country by the Portuguese. Illiteracy of the slave community was up to 90% in the 19th century. And when we started, say, in the Black community in the early half of the 20th century, I mean, the first century of ex-slaves, of so-called freed African and Black population, was over 50%. So if you look at the Atlantic diaspora as a whole, I mean, the whole of South America, Central America, North America, and the Caribbean, Brazil doesn't have a similar situation to any other country, neither the USA, nor Cuba, nor Colombia, thinking about the three that have a kind of a more expressive Afro-derived population. Neither in the percentage of Blacks in the national population. Remember, the United States would be like 10, 11, 12%, not many more than that, or Colombia, more or less 15%. Neither in the percentage of Blacks in the national population, nor in absolute numbers demographically. So out of a total, say, of 11 million Africans enslaved, forced through the Atlantic, 11 to 12 million, Brazil alone received around 5 million, so almost half of the entire Atlantic trade. So this is just a picture of what kind of country Brazil is, not as a tourist agency will tell you, but the facts of the society as it is. So that from 1900 onwards, I mean, as soon as abolition of slavery occurred in 1888, 1891, there became a republic. So there was a constitution of a republic. Brazil decided then, the state decided to foster European immigration immediately. So from 1900 onward, systematic racism against the Black people began with the arrival of the European immigrants. So practically around 3 million European immigrants from Italy, Germany, Poland, and so on, Russia and Ukraine started to come to Brazil, apart from the Portuguese already there. And they started to compete immediately with the freed slaves now. The Brazilian white elite realized that Blacks would inevitably become a majority. And then they created a state policy to stimulate immigration from Europe, to transform the demographic tendency and make Brazil become a white country. So in the beginning of the century, of the 19th century, the project was to finally get a white country in America. The benefits of reparation that the state didn't give to the ex-slaves, it should be also said that the law that they called our golden law of 1888 was just as from this day onwards is declared finished slavery in Brazil. That was the only item of the law. There was no reparation. There was no grant title for the ex-slaves, no process for study, no benefits in starting small businesses, anything. Just slavery was abolished. So they entered the situation of free civilians with no support from the state after all the period of slavery. So the benefits of reparation that the state didn't give to ex-slaves after 350 years, it provided for the newly arrived white immigrants. The white immigrants had land, credit, jobs, help with opening businesses, schooling, and so on. So Black phenotype became a real stigma as a historical sign of a slave ascendancy. The white body affirmed and soon confirmed Brazilian national identity as a Western society, and the Black body affirmed the country's African background, something the white elite wished to eliminate definitely. They even calculated that the Black group would disappear after 3 generations. As for indigenous peoples and nations, they were submitted since 1500 to a systematic and continuous genocide with no politics of peace until today. So we still today talk about the genocide of the indigenous peoples. We should remember that we have 305 indigenous nations in Brazil. We could compare it with India. I think Brazil and India are the two probably the most diverse countries in the world. 305 indigenous nations speaking around 200 different languages. So universities were opened only in the 20th century. There was no universities during the colonial times and even in the 19th century, opposed to our our neighbors, the Spanish-speaking countries, Argentina, Colombia, all of them had universities since the 17th, 16th, 17th century. So universities were open only the 20th century as totally white institutions, white lecturers, white students, white staff. The first proposal for the inclusion of Blacks in higher education was printed in the journal Quilombo. Quilombo means maroon. The maroon communities, those who fled from slavery, the Marronage, there were maroons in Cuba, even in the United States too, in the whole of the Caribbean, Colombia, in almost all the countries that had slaves had maroon. So the maroon was the name of the journal, the newspaper called Quilombo. That was organized by Abdias do Nascimento, perhaps the greatest Black Brazilian intellectual in the 20th century, an equivalent somehow to Ambedkar. That was in his first edition of the journal Quilombo in December 1948. In the 1948, the program, the Quilombo had a 5-proposal program. The third proposal of their 5 program was the following: until the entire education system is not free for all, to fight for admission of Black students funded by the state in all official and private institutions, both in high school and in higher education, including the military schools. They had this proposal stated in 1948. Abdias, the greatest probably intellectual and activist in Brazil in the 20th century, he was exiled, lived for many years in the United States. He taught in American universities, and he taught in Nigeria too. But he never taught in Brazilian universities, even when he came back in 1983. You see how the plight of the Black population in the academy in Brazil. After Abdias Quilombo, that was 1948, the next really important political pressure and proposal of the Black community as regards quotas were a march called the Zumbi dos Palmares. Zumbi was the leader of one of the most famous maroon communities, was the Palmares. That was in 16th, 17th century. There was a march of over 50 Black people that walked all over the country to get to Brasilia in 1995. That was the next important historical moment. President Fernando Henrique Cardoso, who was a neoliberal, just met the leaders of the Black March and proposed to start a kind of grupo de trabalho, a working group with the ministers to think of how to include something. For instance, he was very proud because he signed the first Black general. He was, I signed, the post for the first Black general in Brazil. In 150 years, we got one Black general, and he's still proud of this. So this is more or less the ambience of Brazil when we started the quota systems. It all started, I must say it very quickly, but it's important. In 1990, came a Black student to study with me, to be his director of his PhD thesis, Arivaldo, but we call him Ari, from Bahia. A very bright, brilliant student, actually. And he was failed in a discipline, in a course, which was an obligatory course, soon in the end of the first semester. That was a disaster, because if he failed in a obligatory course, he would lose his fees. He would lose his scholarship. That would be the end of his career. I was very stunned by that, and we soon realized that it was a case of racial discrimination. Then we start to fight to see if he could revise that fail, to talk to the professor, see whatever other things could be done. And then it became a crisis, a general crisis, because the colleagues supported the professor who failed him. And we start to push this further in different points of the administration. And then I realized that Ari was the first Black student who entered the PhD program in 20 years. They were all white. I was teaching white students for 20 years, not myself only in 20 years, but in 20 years. And second, he was the first to fail in this obligatory discipline in 20 years. That's too much of a coincidence to accept. So this was a very traumatic struggle inside the Department of Anthropology. It took almost 2 years, and he left to Bahia, and it was an incredible pain and really trauma and conflict with colleagues. It was an open and an avoidable conflict. So in the climax of this conflict that seemed, that there would be no way out for him to continue, I had the kind of insight that, well, then we had to propose quotas as a response to this case of racism. If it's so difficult to get one student to keep one student at the University of Brasilia, so let us put 20% of all the places for Black students so that some of them may survive this racist environment. So for me, up to then, there had been very many cases of racism inside Brazilian universities, but usually they were silenced. The colleagues will just be together and stop the situation. For the first time, there was a crisis, continues until today, unfortunately. So in this moment, we decided then to open quotas for Black students. And perhaps I could say something more, perhaps to make it even more, a little more understandable for some colleagues, perhaps from other countries, is that our racist ideology is quite different from Indian one. Indian is explicit ideology. The caste system has no room for disguise. You just put people in a hierarchy of superiors and inferiors. Brazilian race ideology and practical races, it's quite disguised and camouflaged, even in academy. It doesn't have an explicit ideology of supremacism and superiority of one group over others, such as Brahmanism. I mean, if you take say Jotilai, if you take Pule, Jyotirao Pule, just in the beginning of slavery, of Gilamgiri, as Ambedkar will do the same later, he can show to you explicitly how the Brahmins see themselves as superior and write on it and justify it ideologically. As they both expose wide the deep prejudice, discrimination, and violence of the caste system. There's no ambiguity behind it. If you think of apartheid in South Africa, that was a law of supremacy that lasted for decades. It was explicit again. And the laws of segregation in the US also, they were explicit. You cannot go to the same bar, you cannot go to the same restaurant, you cannot pick up the same bus, you have to go to a different school. It was all explicit. And Zionist supremacy in Israel today is explicit at the same time. I mean, a god of a particular god or a group of gods decided that you are superior to the others, and that's it. Brahmanical supremacy is the same. I had a colleague in Belfast, Bongani Mtetua, who died. He was murdered by the apartheid regime. So I mentioned him now as a homage to him. It's the first time I mentioned him in a lecture, in a conference. He told me once that Stellenbosch University, they concocted the theology of apartheid. And I remember Bongani telling me that he was Zulu by quoting the Bible. And they would say that Jesus was the Lord of separations. That's very cunning, isn't it? So white people cannot live together with Black because Jesus doesn't want it. So apartheid would be a holy way of living. Can you imagine? In Brazil, we don't have anything like this. This project of the beginning of the 19th century, it stopped in the 30s and came a second ideology, which is dominant still in the country. So we don't have these explicit ideologies. It was the racism in Brazil was neutralized discursively by ideology of racial democracy. We're supposed to be a racial democracy. Black people are outside the university, not because they lack of merit. With time, as they study harder, they'll enter. So we are then in Brazil in the realm of phenotypical racism. Phenotypical racism is different from US, is different from South Africa, is different from India. That's why I always emphasize quota as part of an anti-racist struggle to expose phenotypical racism. By what? Forcing the state, forcing the universities to accept people with the wrong phenotype. Not with a wrong caste or a wrong law, but with wrong phenotype in the years of the white racists. The first step towards an equitable society in terms of class, race, and ethnicity is living together. We have a very nice word in Portuguese, which is convivência. Convivência, living with, co-living. Conviviality will be the quality of the convivência, or the potential for convivência, but the convivência will be the existential process, experience of living together, of co-living. So quotas for me is an element of convivência. It is not enough, but it's a necessary condition. Young students, Black students, white students, indigenous students, they have to share the same classroom and learn the beginning, the basis of convivência, the basis of living together, so that a future, so a next generation will learn to live together in the same classroom, because we lived in apartheid during the 20th century. Now comes the quota themselves. So from the area fair, I will not speak much. Perhaps I took too longer on the history of it, but the point is, when the area fair just broke out, I asked, how many Black colleagues do I have? We made the census inside the University of Brasília and discovered that we had 15 Black lecturers out of 1,500, so it's 1%. I was stunned. I said, come on, this must be the most racist university in Brazil. As we made the same census, in about 12 or 15 of them, we discovered that Brazil has more by having 1%. Some of them have 0.2, 0.4, 0.5. This was the situation of Brazilian universities in 1998. So as we proposed the details of the quota system in 2003, the system is 20% for Blacks, 20% of all the entrance seats, and some seats for indigenous people, since their population is less. There will be some, but as soon as we started, there was a counter anti-racist move that to emphasize quotas for low-income people. And here I see a debate that I recognize we have something in common, for what I understand of a recent EWS quota to end all quotas, by the Ambedkarite Collective. I'm sure you know it. Interesting, because it's similar. The EWS, for what I understand, is similar to this discussion of low income. I mean, you stop the affirmation of anti-racism by having quotas for Blacks. You softened the real radicality of the quota system. We have this discussion until today. We still have this debate between what they call them social quotas or racial quotas. I am a strong defender until today of racial quotas. If there are less people with low-income universities, then you have another quota for them. And you have, if you don't have enough students for public school, then you have another quota for them. But racial quotas and indigenous quotas, ethnic quotas, are necessary as such because the Black population suffer racism regardless of class and regardless of whether they studied in a public or in a private school. So this is the great movement. It's an effervescence. I don't know if I could show to you, if I can, Suraj, if I could perhaps show you a presentation with some images. Let me see, just a moment.
Yeah, no worries. You can share now.
Huh? Yes. You can I share, or do you share for me?
No, you can share. Yeah.
Can I? Well,
Yeah.
I know, but why? How do I find it? Oh, because I had to reinitiate. Remember?
Oh, so did you delete or something?
Not that I deleted, but I'll have to. Just a second. I'll do it.
Okay, no worries.
Yeah, it's good. The idea of no words is very good. We should not worry. Oh,
In the meanwhile, I can just
go on. Okay. Now I can go here. How do I? You're not seeing it, right?
no, we are seeing it.
You are already seeing it.
Yeah, it's a PowerPoint presentation.
Yes. So here it is. Look, this is the library of the Institute. You can see in the white books there. This
Yeah,
is the collection. This is the writings and speeches.
yeah.
Yes. This is the collection of all, yeah, and on top of them, on the left side of them, are Ambedkar's books. You know, I buy as many as I can. So the biblioteca, the library is called B.R. Ambedkar. It's a homage to Ambedkar because it was the genius who started the quotas in the world. For me, he was the genius of as a political scientist in the 20th century. He broke with liberalism, universalism, even with communist universalism as such.
Exactly.
And here's an important, just a general for you, that Brazil is 203 million people. The black population change now is bigger than it used to be. Can you imagine 53% blacks? And just 20 years ago, you had just 1% of black professors. The racial inequality is just horrible. But this is something that people outside Brazil don't get it so easily. You know, people are fascinated by this idea, by carnival, that all blacks and whites and all together, you know, they join samba, they join festivals. This is can be very powerful as an ideology of integration just in public spaces, but not in schools, not in universities, and not in the real important points. So this is here, that's another important element. After 10 years, so we started in 2003, and this continued for other universities. From 2003 to 2010 to 12, around 100 universities started to open their own system of quotas, making the different combinations of percentages and regional considerations, all different one from the other. So I designed this map of affirmative action. I have it separately. I can show it perhaps later if you want to see it. I imagine like affirmative action, the political unconscious of the quote, the collective unconscious, the political unconscious just emerged. And people started to combine types of quotas and subjects for quotas. So I organized them in a system, like in a semiotic. So I devised a semiotic system where affirmative action became like a language that you combine, you know, the subjects of black, whites, indigenous, regional people, maroons, and then you had quotas. Suddenly, as you had people coming from low income, then blacks become sub-quotas, and some become just like places, and some become like percentages of numbers of the exams. So it becomes a real imaginative world that is this map, like it shows the 10 years of this amazing system. I will just very briefly now to finish, see the consequences that we had so far of this movement. And 3 questions I will ask to finish. Where we were, as I told you, we were nothing, practically, almost next to nothing. Where we are, so the start point, last year, we commemorated 20 years of the day we approved quotas in Brasilia, 6th of June, 2003, the day of the approval of the quotas. So you had here a kind of a timeline to see how we are, hopefully, and thanks to God, we are accelerating the process of inclusion, in the expansion of the quotas. Then we can compare with Ambedkar. Ambedkar will be the opposite, because Ambedkar started with a big picture. He had a big vision of all the elements together. We couldn't do this. We were not able to do this. We had to focus on quotas as a strategic point of the system, as I call it. Ambedkar saw reservations, constituency, right, land, finance, so many things together. We couldn't start with such a big picture. We focus on higher education, universities, public universities, important universities. From there, power expand, because we'll take the position of power where decisions of the country are made. So, area fair, the question has always come back to, if we have quotas, that's because racism is rampant in society. That's why we need quotas as an anti-racist. So as we launched the proposal of quotas in the year 2000, RE finally was approved in that discipline. And our department, my department of anthropology, was forced to go against the professor who failed him and finally approve him so he could finish his PhD. It's like the Dreyfus affair, in a way, of France, against Jews, and now in this case, against a black student. Then in 2001 started the Enegrecer, which means being black, becoming black, a collective of black students. Immediately, in many universities started to discuss quotas, started to appear collectives of students, of black students. They start to organize themselves in collectives. There are many of them in most universities. Then you had also the Durban Conference, the World Conference Against Racial Discrimination. It helped us because we already had a proposal in Brasilia. So as the delegation came from Durban, it spread more in the news, the discussion of quotas. In 2003, Lula signs the law that makes obligatory the study of Africa and Afro-Brazilian studies, of Brazilian culture. And in March 21st, was created the Ministry of Racial Equality. Finally, I invited the minister, a black woman, and in June 6th, we approved the quotas in Brasilia with the presence of the minister. So the state became involved. So this, you could say, some of the consequences. The university, one important consequence, for the first time in the history of the country, the University Council has changed the rules that had been in place in all federal universities since they were founded. Entrance exams have always been universalist. It stopped being universalist in 2003 with the quotas. It's a revolution in the way entrance was defined. A second, we conceptualized and formulated a target plan for social, ethnic, and racial equality, and all the structuring actions of the target plan. What we have done since then until today is to expand the 203 target plan. So as I say, it will be like a zoom. Ambedkar came from a big zoom and already, right? And then the zoom will illuminate every part. We started from one point, as if there was a cone, that we started really from one strategic point and start to make it expand. That's the strategic possible in Brazil, as for him was the strategic possible in India. We connected the struggle for quotas with the anti-racist struggle, both in the society and the state. The Secretary of the Human Rights of the Ministry of Justice was involved in the area affair. So the Brazilian state was involved in the solution of a specific case of academic racism. So there was a precedent of involvement then, as now we have a Ministry of Racial Equality and a Ministry of Human Rights. The presence of the minister was also an important point. Another important point will be in 2010, a public hearing. This is maybe connected with Ambedkar again. A public hearing in the Supreme Court against quotas in Brazil. Most intellectuals started to fight against quotas. And then it came to the Supreme Court to decide whether quotas were constitutional or unconstitutional. Remember that in the US, they declared it unconstitutional, right, with Trump. I was the defendant. I defended the UNB in this public hearing. So the UNB was the center of the national political dispute. The important point was, in 2012, the Supreme Court decision in favor of the constitutionality of quotas. As Ambedkar put it straight away on the Indian Constitution in 1949, we could only do it in 212. We were doing it on the autonomies of the universities. Finally, the Supreme Court decided, oh, what you've done is okay, it's constitutional, we can go on. So the idea of expansion now is guaranteed because quotas are constitutional. And the second, we are the only one, as you say, with the EWS, the quotas to end quotas. I'm just really liking to read this book of the Ambedkar age group because it's similar to our situation here. At this moment, University of Brazil is the only university in Brazil that still has racial quotas. All the other ones have sub-quotas because they have introduced in the low income as necessary. So they split the racial community into low income Black and not low income Black. For me, this is unacceptable. Quotas in graduate students. Now I'm just finishing with the three. I said I would. Quotas are a projection into the future to achieve ethnic, racial, and social equity, to provide equal opportunities for Black, Indigenous peoples as compared to whites. And third, to build a new curriculum that will provide, for the first time after 5 centuries, a non-racist imaginary. Our curriculum is racist in its imaginary, which is an European imaginary. It's Eurocentric and its imaginary is racist. We will change the curriculum with the presence of Black students, with the presence of Black professors. So where we are, just finished now, where we are and where we are heading. Where we are, undergraduate equality is secured. All the universities, you can look at them now, they all have Black, Indigenous, Maroons, low-income students in the same class. I used to teach at the University of Brasilia 20 years ago in a classroom with only white students. This does not exist anymore. It's racially and ethnically integrated on an undergraduate level, definitely. Now, graduate quotas, we are still halfway. We have 70 federal universities. Only 35 of them have applied quotas for all the graduate programs. Brazil, we did it in 2013, 2014. So we are in the middle of it. We are halfway to achieve. Now comes the third, which is not so easy. Black lecturers, Indigenous lecturers just started. The number is we haven't made the progress we want to make. We need to be put even more pressure now. And the second one will be research careers in the National Research Council. For instance, I'm a researcher, right? A senior researcher of the National Research Council, like 8,000 up to 10,000 researchers nationwide. There are very few Black. You can count them, perhaps when you have a seminar that we all go together, you can spot so many, 5, 6, 7 only. They haven't put quotas yet on the National Research Council. This is our goal to do this. Quotas in executive this year. You see how quotas are expanding. Lula, the President Lula, in the beginning of this year, he put 30% of quotas for Blacks in the executive posts. Not in legislative, not in Congress, but in executive, we have now 30% quotas. We started with just Brasilia, then became all the universities, undergraduate, started with graduate, a bit in lecturers. Now we're coming to executive. Parliament, nothing. Ambedkar, you thought of the whole discussion in the Pune Pact was exactly to fight against Gandhi for the separate places. We don't have that. High courts, terribly white. Nothing. You didn't have this. Ambedkar was more strategic in the Constitution. We are making it laws. We are making laws, but it's not in the Constitution. Land reform, almost nothing. I will stop now. I can't talk now on the meeting of knowledges, but as you remember, Nalanda, you know that has been reopened, right? Some years ago. I find this wonderful. This was the great university practically in the world of all times, no? with many languages spoken. For me, the meeting of knowledges is an inspiration like Nalanda, right? Or the of the Beit al-Hikmah in Baghdad. The meeting of knowledges is all the traditional knowledge, oral and written together. So this is where we are now. So thank you. I think I stop now and we can go. Perhaps I can. Okay.
Thank you so very much, Professor Carvalho. This has been a real treat to me personally and to many. And I would like to apologize. I don't know how to say sorry in Portuguese. At least I should have made that effort. To our Portuguese-speaking friends, they were writing that unfortunately we couldn't do a live translation for them. We sincerely apologize, and hopefully down the line we will rectify it. There are so many important points you touched upon, especially the 300 years history that pertains to slavery. And in the 1880s is when slavery was formally abolished. And, in fact, just yesterday I was reading a document here about Boston and what abolitionists were doing. And, they were already moving past and there was legislation. So many people also don't know that Brazil was the largest slave contingent holding society in the world. And I think in that sense, it's quite gratifying to see the kind of work you are doing and the colleagues who have contributed to it. I have a few questions, and then I also invite our audience members to please type your questions, and we will accordingly pass it on. So, one of the way you guys have started was University of Brasilia seems like the ground zero of what has going to in the past 20 years. And there are so many kind of comparative relevances and possibilities that one can really build on. But nevertheless, education, it's important, that became a site. 1919, when Dr. Ambedkar was representing at the South Borough Commission, which literally was trying to find the franchise. One of his arguments was about, there was also about who to give representation, and education qualification became one of those. And we are talking about, early 20th century, where owning a land, property, or having a certain kind of education was a qualifier to have a franchise. And Dr. Ambedkar kind of made a case about minority rights and what minority really means, in the sense of not having all these rights, but yet you could have a qualitative representation. And so early on, education remained his focus. In fact, one of the mantras that we kept repeating that he borrowed here from the socialist movement was about educate, agitate, organize. And so education not really is as a faith, but the kind of facilities. He also started his own schools, as in colleges, which later, became still were one of the first cradle of new Dalit minds to kind of get together in Bombay and Aurangabad, and he had plans the other parts of India. So I can see the kind of work that your proposal is for the past 20 years that you experience. The kind of education becomes a way, and also through education, you create two things. One is you create a upwardly mobile class that has access to certain resources and avenues that they can utilize for their own advocacy and welfare. And the second thing is gives you a certain status with that status. And it could be what Bourdieu would call the habitus, that you operate in different kind of habitus and work for your own advantage, or you have an access to public sphere, the spherical knowledge in Nancy and so forth. We know this. So I think education is really the way when we look at it, and certainly the struggle. So the first, comment/question was the EWS, like what they propose, social quota as opposed to racial quota. And I think there has always been the pushback, and especially in a neoliberal time where privatization and excessive corporatization through contract labor and non-ownership of the others through the administration is something that's happening. And and it's very ironical that the regime which promotes financial neutrality when it comes to redistributing of resources advances the rich class, while at the same time wants to use the same rich formula to give quotas. So it's ironical. On the one hand, you want to dole out certain benefits for the billionaire and the top creme de la creme, while use the same argument to then talk about social welfare. And I think this is what also happens in your part of the world as well. And the important fact is, I mean, nobody denies the economic importance of this, but there is how the society configures, and it's not a wrong feeling. So in India right now, because the quota system has been inactive, at least constitutionally, from 19 when we had the first Government of India Act, and the government was implemented, and there were certain kind of and Dr. Ambedkar, in fact, what he did was to create schemes of scholarships, and so he really wanted the few kind of from the government. So every time Dr. Ambedkar, which differs from many other policies, was that he centralized the state. Many people don't want to centralize the responsibility of the state, but he gave state autonomy and power, and also gave the constituency to fight. So state has to, and so I could see those relevances. So the question is as follows. Before that, I think one thing you guys have done effectively, in addition to which we have not done, and I think which is where you win a medal here, is to have a proposal of new curriculum, which is diverse, which is inclusive, which is representative of what knowledge, and also it many ways challenges and to speak of Brazil and talk about knowledge and pedagogy and think about Freire and how we ourselves evolve through it is what is, I think, important here. We lack that. The undergraduate equality, you said it's been achieved. Now the slow progression is going to teaching faculty, and slowly the kind of web is expanding. And now from education, there are other avenues that you will find. Now, right now in India, because of the neoliberalization of our government services, there is a proposal for nearly 20 plus years for having quotas in private sector, because the government is slowly selling out to private players. We had a national airline that's now private. We had important government-owned agencies and companies now which had a quota. Now it has become privatized. So there is a push to have a reservation in private sector. And I think these are the kind of issues that kind of complement to our thinking. So the question for you is as follows. What happens to the constitutionality debate currently? Because any civil society relies on what the rule of law says. And certainly you guys have now, since 2012, the Supreme Court's constitutional assent, which they have agreed to it. But also, are there possibilities to re-examine? If Supreme Court has said about quotas, then is there a possibility to use that precedent and apply it to other areas not covered by the quota? And by this, what I mean is in representation in various other, I mean, talking about representation, basically, I mean, can that language be used, or what's going on in Brazil on this front? So you can respond to that. Meanwhile, I will also gather questions. I invite our participants to please write your questions or send to me personally if you want to.
Okay, thank you. Well, it was quite I see many points in contact to what you say. Well, the question of constitutionality, I think we won a great case because it was 10-0. I mean, the Supreme Court had no. Because usually you can re-examine if there is some tension. It's 10-0. How can you go in the name of what could you go again to the Supreme Court? Not for this case. And actually, even Bolsonaro, the fastest government we had, we were very afraid in the year 2022, his last year, because the law of quotas started in 2012, and it was supposed to last 10 years, and it will be revised after 10 years. So we were very afraid that he had a great influence on the Congress, they might stop it, but he didn't dare to touch it. So it was renewed last year in 2023. And now it's not only for 10 years, it will continue. And we have also the law for civil servant, which is also 20%. Now it became 3%, 30%. It started in 2014 and finished. It will finish in August. But the Supreme Court allows it to continue until a new law will be passed by the Congress. So this is it signalizes, it gives the message that it's okay to continue with the quotas in the civil service. And now if you think that Lula did by the executive 30% in the executive, so that this means that constitutionally, I don't think we have a problem for blacks. The Constitution had been very bad with indigenous, with what I think that they call the temporal mark, which is horrible, that they were supposed only the indigenous people who were living in their villages, in their places where they traditionally their territories until 1988, the year that the new constitution was declared, only they can have access and claim, the titles for their territories. Those who cannot prove this do not have this right. This is terrible. Since they were here since 1500 when the Portuguese came, so the discussion in the Supreme Court for the indigenous is not as strong still as with the black. I don't know. You were so. I'm not clear to me why you asked that about constitutionality, because you re-examine, because I understand that Ambedkar went further than we did because he put it in the constitution already. So I imagine it's stronger in this sense, right? We have a difference here between what we call in the constitution, there are some articles that are considered frozen, like you can touch them, and others that you can. And I imagine that Ambedkar put the quotas in those frozen articles of the Constitution that are not open to new debates. So this was a great achievement.
I think,
Yeah.
Yeah, no, nothing.
No. Go on.
No, I think so I think this is also kind of a conversation on the legality aspect, which I think Brazil managed to kind of gain an additional say, especially in education sector. There is a question for you from Dr. Akurmathi Nageswara Rao, and they say the question is asked.
What's his name?
Dr. Rao, and what they are asking is, in India, we have a question with a notion about merit.
Merit.
And that merit has become such a buzzword that it is almost a stigma now. If you are from a quota, that means you are not meritorious. You are not smart enough. And so many students who would otherwise apply with quota would not apply because of that stigma. How does that work feature, given that it's pretty new policy? Are you seeing any updates from the empirical data or from the ground that you have researched?
This is very important. We fought against this meritocracy for a decade, for 10 years in the debates of quotas. But the evidences that came, the facts are amazing. I mean, quotistas, as you call them, quotistas, the students who entered through quotas, either blacks or indigenous, their performance is similar to the ones who come from the universal competition, sometimes even a bit higher. So this idea that, that they will make the grade of the university get lower, they are degrade our quality, our excellence, academic excellence. This practically we demonstrate with research that it doesn't happen. It's good that Dr. Rao says this. We had this debate on merit. Some areas still resist more, like diplomacy. The school for diplomacy is incredibly white, is incredibly racist in this imaginary, horrible, because they were obliged to speak French and English, and perfect French and perfect English. So of course, that makes some students from the white, middle class and upper class, who study this more in better schools, can fare better. So the quotas there, they don't accept quotas in the diplomacy.
Okay.
They is the same in India?
No, there is
accept-
quota.
There is quota for Dalits in diplomacy.
Yeah.
Now we have something that I don't like, and even they asked me to assess the what they call the policy that I have. I think it's a very bad policy. They give for some black students a fee during a year to prepare themselves. You see, you choose whatever private school you want to learn good English, learn good French, and so on, and then you do the competition all the whites. So it's not quota really. Usually, even if they have this amount of money, it's not enough to compensate the fact that the others of the upper class will have their entire lives. They have lived abroad and so on. So we as I say, it's a weak part that we haven't gone into diplomacy yet, and she says it's merit. And diplomacy is critical as an anti-racist career. Because the image that Brazil projects for the rest of the world is of a white country. Because all the diplomats are white. It's terrible. We haven't gone further. So they hold on this ideology of merit. And the judicial system too, because their language is so abstruse, so impossible, right? And this gongoric, baroque language of law. In Portuguese, I don't know in English. I think in English it's not as bad. In Portuguese, it's horrible. Sometimes I listen to the court and I can't follow if the judge is against or in favor of what he's saying. So complex it is. So they say, oh no, only if you really come from the elite, you can master the Portuguese language of law to be a proper judge of the high courts. So I don't know if he says about merit. I don't know if I could talk a little bit about meeting of knowledges compared to that, because you said about the question of curriculum.
Sure.
Because the epistemic quotas, I don't know, Suraj, what I would like to ask. The epistemics of Pule and Ambedkar, of Shudras and Atishudras, they are not following the Vedic system as such, right?
No,
No. But the universities would only have either Western or the Vedic system. So the pluriepistemy of India is not represented in universities so far. Am I right?
Correct.
Well, this is our battle now. Our universities have to be pluriepistemic. There will have to be 3 stems, as I call them, like the Borromean knots of Lacan. I couldn't prepare an image of this, but you can imagine the 3 knots of Lacan. One would be the Western, the other the indigenous, the other the Afro-Brazilian, with some interceptions in them. So
I can maybe share the one that you share with me.
In the journal, in the interview. Oh, wonderful. Yeah, that's right. Thank you. Yes, you have the 3 stems, right? When we started in the year 2000, the circle will be only one, the Western circle, and the indigenous and the Afro-Brazilian will be included inside the Western system that would represent the indigenous and they would represent blacks. As we expanded with the quotas, blacks started to represent themselves, indigenous epistemes started to represent themselves. It started with the students, because as soon as we started with the quotas, black students will say, oh, but this curriculum only talks about white writers, white poets, white philosophers. When are we going to read black writers, black poets, black musicians? The indigenous would say the same. Wow, this ethnography, this representation of our nation is very partial and sometimes wrong. When are we going to have our own representation of our own nations? Talking there about 305 nations. I think India is something like that, right? In 200 languages. So the meeting of knowledges is the necessary complement to quotas. As I say, it's a double inclusion. Ethnic and racial inclusion, in the case Dalit inclusion, say, and epistemic inclusion. Oral traditions have to come So it's a different revolution. We will start with the Humboldtian model of university. We have to think the university that really reflects, mirrors the richness, the richness of the knowledges that are in the country. So we had to include the masters of traditional knowledge. Some of them are illiterate, most of them. It's a revolution that you have now illiterate people teaching PhD students. I don't think it has ever happened. But this is a necessary step that started with the quotas. As you say, it's an expansion, uncontrolled in a way. But now you have it like a second movement of quotas. You have like 20 universities and many more, like 10 or more. Oh, the meeting of knowledges is in Austria already, the University of Vienna. It is in Colombia. Probably it will start, we are in discussion of this maybe in China, in Taiwan, as I will go in November. Maybe we can even think of this in India, because the Dalit masters could come to teach, even if they don't have a complement of yourself, right? The ones that come from the oral masters can come. So this for me is a future that has a consequences for how someone is saying, oh, you can switch on your camera. Oh, once you, Naland is a wonderful thing, no? It's like 10 or 12 countries together in the same place where Xuanzang was there, no? He's another hero for me, Xuanzang. How he managed to go and get there and go back alive. He had one chance in a million to survive. It's so fantastic, so extraordinary.
There are many stories. His biographer also talks about how many times he missed the death. In fact, when he was coming, he left the kingdom in China and he was already in the desert in China. And the next chief until realized was going to shoot him. So we have these exciting stories to think about.
No, but that's just one thing that's missing. So not to forget. In the case of Nalanda, it's wonderful now that there's even Thailand, China, Japan, so many together, Vietnam in Nalanda. But the written tradition only is missing the plain orality of the masters who have no title. I mean, the staff of Nalanda are like we are, like academics. Meeting of knowledges is a bit further, because you have the living treasures who are in the plain oral tradition also teach together with us who are literates. So this is the pluriepistemic. This is the complete pluriepistemic new academy with orality and specialized literacy together. But sorry.
No, that's great. I just wanted to kind of, also in your interview that you shared with me, the interviewer Nelson also asked, how do we then think about this in this neoliberal context where everything commodified and there is this thing, and you also give a brilliant answer to that, which I will invite you space. I just want to go back to this question of this creme de la creme. So the diplomacy and bureaucracy, especially in the English Empire, they were always part of the aristocratic noble class. They were relatives of each other, and they went to a specific education system, Eton, Oxford, and so forth, who were then, at least for India, Oxford was the hotbed. And that's how they kind of reproduced. Now, Dr. Ambedkar, when the Public Service Commission was being established, whenever it came to the state facilities, so even if we have like a private institutions which are aided by government, where government gives them aid, you are bound to have quotas there. That's the rule, and that's why many government aided institutions get the support to run from the government, but also they have to follow this norm. To speak about diplomacy, there are now when I go, it is interesting to see there are Dalits who are diplomats, who are in different countries running the affairs of the state. So I think that has not happened suddenly. The diplomacy as a chosen field was not often, due to the language barriers, were not given to the Dalit candidates. They had to excel. But I think over the years now it has gradually increased, where in your first or second posting, you learn the language. It's not that you need to have language as you want to go, but still it is considered an elusive. But otherwise, if you are a state administrator, or if you are a police, or you're any other government a bureaucrat, that kind of exclusion doesn't apply. And this happened to me when you were mentioning about the eliteness of language. I was in Coimbra, University of Coimbra, and I met
Mhm.
Brazilian students who were white, and they were studying something to do with to become a international policymaker or go work for the UN, or I guess the foreign service as well. I specifically remember who were my host to give a talk. And what that tells me in larger scheme of things is, for us, the Dalit curriculum is not even alive. It's only now that few of us abroad are like thinking about it. We don't have it's still a battle, and these are people from the dominant castes, who have a certain leaning towards the left or communist or whatever philosophy and ideology. They created that, but they never gave provenance to what it means to be a Dalit epistemic knowledge. Because that was, and why wouldn't they give? Because they are not coming from that background. So it's only now, after so many, at least 3 generations of quotas, that my generation is proactively seeking. Of course, the generation before me laid the foundation to that kind of thought, and now there is more emphasis on, oh, what did this guy wrote? What does that guy write? Let's try to collaborate. So in that sense, Brazil, especially what you are saying, seems pretty advanced in the sense that we're already thinking of this plural epistemic approaches, already think about how indigenous knowledge frameworks operate. And I think that really gives us an interesting perspective. I would like to invite you to finally comment on and because I don't see there are many questions. Let's say hypothetically, Brazil is one of the Latin American countries. Do you see something of that? And I imagine Brazil is also influential in the Latin American, South American countries' alliances. Something similar have you seen in Latin America, in other parts of your region, or not? Or somebody has reached out to you, let's say from Colombia, you mentioned about some university, private university there trying to do something, or is there Mexico, some other country? We always listen to Peru and Uruguay, who are always having this incredible leaders. Any comment on that, please?
That's wonderful, because yesterday I talked to a friend of mine, Santiago Arboleda. He's a Colombian, a Black Colombian, but he's a professor at Ecuador, at Quito. He just came 2 weeks ago. He was in Rio de Janeiro. I couldn't see him there. He organized, we were organized together with the Institute and the University of Simón Bolívar. That's the University of the Andean countries. A meeting with like 7 or 8 countries of Afro-diasporic, especially women, for the affirmative actions for the Afro-diasporic women. The law, because there are very few professors who are Black, not only in Brazil but also in Colombia. The same is in Ecuador, Panama. All of them is very, very few. And Santiago came to Rio 2 weeks ago, and they started an international association of researchers of Afro-Ibero-American research from Ibero-American to foster the case of an Afro-Latin American academia. The same, because there are quotas, but there are very few. The percentage is very, very low in Colombia. That's 3%, 4% sometimes. And in Ecuador also it hasn't had quota yet, nor Peru. We advanced a lot in the last 20 years, certainly. But this is, for me, I also insist on that. We have to transform the curriculum at the same time. We have to have epistemic quotas at the same time. Imagine the name, the Colombia is like 60 indigenous nations, but none of them are included. Their masters are not included in the universities. It's such a pity. I mean, our university must be epistemic, much more rich than they are now. They are just reproduced in a Western model of knowledge. It's the same. Even Mexico. Mexico has a called intercultural university for the indigenous people. But if you go to UNAM, to the National University of Mexico, is Western, is Eurocentric. Most are Eurocentric. So the meeting of knowledge is something that I really believe it in diverse nations as India and Brazil or Latin America. It's impossible to continue with the model of a neurocentric or a Brahmanic only university. Brahmanic would be monoepistemic in the same way.
Precisely.
See, so as the Dalit, just a last comment, you're saying that it's a battle, this epistemes. It's fantastic because it's similar to the indigenous epistemes here. They are just starting to get shape, with the students, with the indigenous students, and now with the indigenous masters. It's a project, of a continuous project, which we can find the similarities. Well, you also have the scheduled tribes in India, no? To include in the university. I suppose they are not much in the universities.
Absolutely. In fact, the tribal culture itself, and there is a university for tribal. It's also a tribal university. It's named tribal, and the kind of knowledge spaces that is producing there. And one of the curious facts of this is that even with that, you have to adjust to a certain English epistemology. Like even if you are from the tribal community, you will have to adhere to those, because without that, there is no kind of absence of audience. And so somehow it's a two-edged sword. Even for the Dalits, English has become a site of gaining equal power. But also at the same time, when you are conversing in English, that English is not the language that is meant for you to excel. That is meant for you to just get by. So that's a difference in how like many of our friends who go to English schools, they go to specific private English schools that is preparing them to become the ruling class. But you go to a school that teaches you English, but it's just teaching you to become the subordinate of those ruling class. So many of us went to those kind of schools that were kind of subordinated. But also the curriculum that is not English, but in India we have regional languages, which is now going away, in the sense of not going away totally, but English is taking over as a primacy. And so there are many more questions, because historically Brahmin actors who were having the power, they embraced the modernity of English language, and they conducted their life in such a way that it's no accident that people from the Brahmin background meet me in different parts of the world. And I think that's the growing challenge of how to not just ask for a quota that gives representation, but also this very important word of epistemic quota that complements together, or else the difference would be you might go up, but the up might not be necessarily on the ladder, but you might just go a different way. The idea is to scale, and so that if it's complemented with something that complements their knowledge, can I think this is like a bicycle of two wheels that needs to follow one another, right? And for us to think, and I think this is also a learning lesson for some of us who are advocating for similar policies, to really think. In India, what they did was they sponsored Dr. Ambedkar chairs. The government gave Dr. Ambedkar chair and I think it was Professor Sukhdeo Thorat and the ministry who kind of approved of such kind of policies. And very interestingly, India is complex and every state has its own language. So if you go to, I was in Karnataka, one of the states where they speak Kannada, and they had Dr. Ambedkar chair, and they had whatever, and they spoke in their language, in Kannadiga. So this kind of multilingual exchange is still a space that is possible in India. It's just that how do we embrace the Dalit or Adivasi, the scheduled tribe, and also many Shudras who have a non-Brahminical background, a non-Brahminical viewpoint of the world, which is very much rooted, as Kanchailaya, one of the Shudra intellectuals, says, their knowledge is produced in the field by the sweat. And if you are able to cognize that as a labor, as opposed to just sitting, and this is the Brahminical model, where you sit around a Gurukul space, and then you produce yourself in a way that gives you a guarantee. So a Brahmin, for example, historically they are chanting, and they have to memorize the mantras and then the phrases. And that kind of what we call rote learning is what we do for students in India. They have to memorize. Now, memory is a very unique ability. It's not representative of talent or intelligence. It's just what your mind can do. But we have given that as an opportunity to demonstrate merit, which has become very difficult for people who are working in the field. The memorialization for them is a different way. They may know how many thousand trees are here on this path and what this tree has medicinal properties, what tree is good and what tree is bad for what animals. But they may not necessarily remember the kind of rote learning that we are used to in this form. So I think that needs to be challenged. And I think this lecture has opened up a space also for us to think about that, to think about not just quotas in the sense of one's ethnicity, raciality, caste, but also to think about what epistemic quota is. Professor Jose de Carvalho, we are very grateful. This is just first among many conversations. We are hoping, we'll plan to get you in person for a bigger conference in India and also in the US as we try to regroup together. I'm very grateful for your time. I'm very grateful to everybody. I will now please invite Rohit Meshram to offer his concluding remarks.
Yeah, thank you, Suraj, and thank you, Professor. Now, as we have come to the end of this enlightening session, I would like to really extend the heartfelt gratitude to our distinguished speaker, Jose. Your insights and expertise on the topic of quotas and affirmative action have provided us with a deeper understanding and a renewed perspective on these critical issues. Like, we are incredibly grateful for your time and sharing your valuable knowledge with us today. I would also like to thank our moderator, Suraj Yengde, for guiding the discussion. Your thoughtful questions and facilitation have also contributed to the success of this event today. Thank you, everyone who has attended and participated in this inaugural talk. And as Suraj mentioned, we're looking forward to continuing these important conversations and hopefully see you at the future events as well. So thank you once again, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you all of you. Thank you very much.